welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. At the time of me recording this episode, it's actually 3 days before Christmas. It's Monday here. Oh, wait, 2 days before Christmas. And as many people know, I'm in Australia and I have a prolific YouTube channel that produces a daily show. So I tend to pre-record my episodes here on Human Ascension with Ellie, just so that I can kind of get everything organized and meet my deadlines. Otherwise, it's a bit of mayhem. And the Human Ascension with Ellie show airs all over the place. It's often favored by people who subscribe to my YouTube channel or a variety of other podcasts, which I believe I'm on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and also Spreaker. And so those people tend to listen at their convenience. And also the YouTube airing is at people's convenience on my channel as well. But it tends to air early on the Ellie channel. So what this means is that by the time the show has aired in some areas, it hasn't in others. And at this particular point in time, there's something happening. And so when you see this on YouTube, it will probably still be happening. But when you hear it later on Spreaker or something, who knows? I guess we'll find out. And that is this drone fiasco that's been taking place over New Jersey, other parts of the United States, and also supposedly or allegedly throughout the world. The drones may still be in the sky, or they may have disappeared by now. They may have been explained in full by the government, by the US government, or perhaps they are still going to be a mystery. Either way, it doesn't really matter because they represent something bigger. And that's what I'm kind of going to be scratching the surface of that a little bit today. So there are people out there who, no matter what they believe or what they officially hear, are going to be believing what they want to believe about this drone scenario. And that's the case, about whether they're explained to be man-made drones, foreign intelligent drones, US military drones, UAPs, or plasma orbs, or strange lights, or whatever it is that they're described to be. No matter what the official word is. So if we were going to be hearing the truth about these orbs or these drones or whatever it is that people are seeing in the sky, I think we would have been told that already. And the fact that it's been going on for a month and we still don't really have a definitive of what it is at the time that I'm speaking to you just goes to show that whatever we're told later is likely to be whatever was convenient to tell us at the time. So I happen to be of the mindset that if it was an easy to tell scenario, then we would have been told by now. And the fact that we haven't been is the most important part of whatever it is that we're seeing in the sky. So let's start this show today with a bit of insight into what might actually have been going on in the past month or so with these drones, because I happen to think that it's more than just something like sightings in the sky. Okay, I think it has to do with just us, humanity, and it's a symptom of what is occurring in our reality, and perhaps also a sign of what's about to come in the future. So, officially speaking, all right, since early November, there have been numerous reports of mysterious drone sightings across New Jersey and nearby states within the United States. Also in California specifically, and other sightings in the Midwest and pockets of the South. So, pretty much everywhere. There have also been sightings starting off in the beginning of November in Britain. In Britain, there were strange lights that were viewed that were speculated to be those plasma-like orbs that people sometimes see. And they were sighted over US nuclear storage facilities in Britain. There have also been multiple reports of these are unofficial reports, by the way. They might be documented in UFO capture websites that you kind of capture reporting, but they haven't been officially reported by news and media, but they have been reported in multiple other countries. Things like curious objects or crafts in the sky over Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, France, Russia, and China, just to name a few. And I think, did I say Germany? Yes, I did. So across the board, I think also in Mexico by now as well. It may actually even be elsewhere that these sightings have occurred. Quite frankly, it's really hard to keep up because the news has kind of been all over the place. But the news has often been centralized to the US, which means that people are more often than not reporting about this in America rather than anywhere else. And when you hear the news anywhere else, even here in Australia, they're not talking about sightings in Australia. They're talking about sightings in America. So it's very America-centric at the moment. It makes it very difficult for us to really understand what's going on. Is this a propaganda thing? Is this an actual event of some kind that's taking place that is exactly as it appears to be, or is it an event that's kind of being camouflaged with an extra event to distract from what's real? It's really hard to tell what's going on. So the official drone news and how it's evolved kind of went a little bit like this. There's a news station in America called News Nation, and they were the first comprehensive coverage of the drones. Ross Coulthart is a former 60 Minutes Australia host or presenter, and he's been the central recognisable figure at News Nation who's been reporting on the drone activities. He has a show called Reality Check with Ross Coulthart. Ross departed from 60 Minutes in around about 2018. He'd been with the show for 3 years, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And the official story of why he departed 60 Minutes was that there was a disagreement over the renewal of his contract and how much money he should be paid. After he left 60 Minutes, Ross was interviewed by Australia's 3AW radio, and he was quoted as saying something along the lines of nobody, whether it's Australia, I guess, predominantly, but nobody wants to admit that commercial news operators are cutting back on investigative journalism. Now, the reason why I say this is because I think it's really important for us to get that context. The news operators, commercial news operators, the people like the channels on TV, the radio shows that are talking about news, whether it be cable or terrestrial TV or anything, they're in the business of news, but they're cutting back on investigative journalism because investigative journalism doesn't pay as well as opinion does. The opinion hosts they're not cutting back on opinion hosts, and opinion hosts get paid a tremendous amount of money because opinions draw more viewership. The opinions can sometimes be racy or controversial. They don't have to be based on fact. They can be wrong. The opinions can be wrong, but they can also be salacious. And so people watch more opinions these days rather than investigative outcomes, because the opinions happen to be more interesting often than what an investigative journalist is able to accomplish in their reporting. So that immediately had me wondering about Ross Coulthart's comment about why he departed 60 Minutes. Did he consider himself to be an investigative journalist? And if so, is he saying that because he was an investigative journalist who gets to the bottom of things, that was no longer paying 60 Minutes? And so they decided they were going to go with opinion more than journalism. Now, 60 Minutes airs on Channel 9 in Australia, which is owned by the Murdochs. So that gives you the same people who owned Fox News. So that gives you an indication. But that is just a perspective. That is Ross Coulthart's perspective. What I would expect if what he says is true is that 60 Minutes would start going down towards the tabloid kind of direction, because if they don't want to pay investigative journalists, then they still need to have something on TV. And so that means they would be opting more towards the opinions of people rather than their investigations. And so if what he says is true, we should be able to see evidence of 60 Minutes becoming more of a tabloid kind of show, a bit like hard copy rather than something newsy. I actually don't watch 60 Minutes routinely, so I'm not really sure. But from what I have seen, it still seems to be very similar to what I always remembered it to be, which is generally a soft news kind of element where they find a subject and they report on the subject from an investigative standpoint. So I'm not sure. It could be that Ross was just a bit bitter because he didn't get the money that he wanted, or maybe he was told, to go. We don't really know what happened. All we know is what his side of the story was. So the reason why I bring it up in that context is because we do humanity, and this, I have to say humanity because it's happening not only in America, it's happening all over the world. It's happening in Australia and in Britain and America from what I can see. And if that's the case, then it's probably happening throughout the Western world. Our news systems do appear to be heading en masse towards something closer to tabloid journalism. And tabloid journalism is a bit like News of the World, or I think that's the British one. The National Enquirer is another example. I think that's the US version, where you can basically say anything and people take it with a grain of salt mostly because they think, oh, this is just for entertainment. But then there are those who do consider it to be real, and so they might actually fall for it. But generally, tabloid journalism is nonsense. It's not. It's designed to get our hearts pumping. It's designed to get us excited or anxious or to be funny or salacious or something. But it's not actually news. But to some people, it might feel like news. To me, not so much, although who knows? I may have been trapped a few times and believed something that wasn't true either. There's so much nonsense flying around between the internet and the tabloids and reality TV and things like that. It's really hard to know what's real and what's not. A lot of the time, you've got to work really hard to be able to differentiate between things. But one thing I do know for sure is there are a lot of opinions out there masquerading as news, but they're not actually news. So News Nation started talking about these drones, and they devoted quite a number of hours to that. They were airing specials on the news, and their focus seemed to be about how Congress isn't doing anything, the White House isn't doing anything, the Pentagon isn't doing anything, the FBI isn't doing anything, Homeland Security isn't doing anything, and everyone's dropping the ball. Then CBS picked up the news or picked up the story, Fox picked it up, CNN, ABC, NBC, and even MSNBC. And I was quite surprised when I saw MSNBC pick up the news because of the fact that MSNBC tends to be all politics, except they started talking about drones as well. So it's definitely got everyone's attention. US lawmakers also threw their hat into the ring as well. Originally, it was the Conservatives, and they were up in arms about going to briefings with the Pentagon or the FBI and not getting enough information for them to make sense of what was going on with the drones. And then the moderates came in, and the Liberals also now are they started off being pretty quiet about it, but now, or actually it was either quiet or disinterested, the Liberals, but now they're also involved as well. I think that the only person who doesn't seem to be particularly interested is Bernie Sanders. I saw an interview with him where the reporter said, are you concerned about the drone thing? And he kind of goes, oh, sure, okay, I'll be concerned, no worries. But he didn't seem very concerned. And then the president, Joe Biden, has reluctly addressed the issue of the drones as well. And he has said there's nothing to be concerned about. They do seem, they are monitoring the situation, but there doesn't seem to be any concern for national security risk or anything like that. And so people shouldn't be too worried about this scenario. It is what it is without actually providing an explanation. I kind of got the impression that it's almost like there's a bit of a mutiny taking place inside the government, and that the White House and the FBI and the Pentagon and all these big, powerful players may not actually know exactly what's going on, but that there's almost like a rogue element that is just flying its drones up there for whatever purpose. And we will eventually find out what that purpose is. We may not do it this year. It might be next year that we finally find out, 9 months later after the event or something, who knows. But it does sort of seem as though there is some kind of a mutiny or a disagreement or a conflict taking place deep inside the government that we're not privy to. And that there might be this rogue element that's kind of out there doing their own thing. And those who are officially in charge haven't quite got a handle on it, which is the reason why we haven't been hearing very much. But there's different viewpoints as well. And I'm going to be talking about two of the men who have very strong viewpoints today. So let's get down a little bit. So what we've got here is the lawmakers are frustrated because they don't seem to be getting any solid answers in their briefings, even classified briefings. The Pentagon claims not to really know what's going on. The FBI and Homeland Security are the same. The White House is the same. You name it. Nobody officially knows where the drones are coming from and what they're doing at this point in time that I'm recording. All of the agencies deny that these craft that are being seen belong to them. So they're all saying that, they don't belong to any of the American agencies. They don't belong to the US military. And so this would lead us to believe that they're not American. But the agencies are all categorically stating that these crafts, whatever they are, don't belong to foreign adversaries either. So all of the agencies seem to think that the crafts, whatever they are up in the sky, and their presence isn't a threat to the US national security. And so if they're not American craft and they're not foreign adversaries and they don't pose a risk to America, then that combination of information doesn't really make any sense, because someone has to be flying this stuff out there. And if we don't know who it is, and especially if it's flying over protected airspace, which they have been from time to time, and nobody seems to be trying to stop them, then that would be a concern. We have had the FAA close certain airspace up until I think it's the 17th of January. There is currently a no-fly zone, a series of no-fly zone territories that have been enacted by the FAA. And I don't know whether that relates to the public or whether that relates to anything being up there. But it does seem that quietly the government is sort of doing something that is a big question mark. And do you know what? It is Monday, the 23rd, 2 days before Christmas when I'm recording this. And I think the Ellie Dreams on the channel is going to be getting this episode either tomorrow or the day after. And then I think it's scheduled to be my New Year's Day episode at KGRA. By that time, the drone situation may have settled down. They may be gone. They may have been explained. But the thing is, even if that is the case, there will be something else. Some other crazy, unexplained situation will happen, because it's been happening nonstop. That's the way life is these days. Non-stop drama. So let's continue on with this official story about the drones. They have been seen flying in grid-like patterns. Often they come out at night. The government departments say that there's nothing to worry about, and they also say that they don't know what the drones are, or even if they're actually drones. Some of these craft are just a few feet in diameter, just a couple of pounds in weight. Others are huge. And I think they've been described as being as big as a bus in some cases. So some of them are really huge. And we're not even sure what they are, right? The Drones have been spotted near sensitive locations, including military bases, and also Donald Trump, the president-elect's golf course in Bedminster as well. They've been spotted there as well. And the officially speaking, the FAA, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, these are all agencies that are investigating these sightings. But so far, we don't have any real credible answers. So that's the official story. There's also more, though. It's just sort of a big mess of nothing to see here, except everyone can see that there is something going on. And of course, because people are just attention-seeking, we also, and difficult sometimes, we also have your average Joe who is flying their own domestic drone up there just so that they can make a point that they want to be in the mix as well. Because, why not? With all the mayhem, let's throw a few domestic drones up there as well. And that's really confusing the issue, because now when you look up into the sky, you don't know what you're looking at. Are you looking at a domestic drone, a commercial drone, something from the military, a foreign adversary, an orb, some kind of alien spaceship? We don't know what we're looking at. I'm kind of glad that I live in Australia sometimes. I really am. Although I will tell you that when I first became aware of this issue, the reason why I first became aware of it is because I woke up having had a weird little dream. And the first thing that I remembered when I woke up was a voice having said to me that the allies of humanity also are responsible for keeping the sky safe, or also have a job of keeping the sky safe. And that was the very first thing I thought when I woke up. And then I woke up and I thought to myself, well, that's really interesting. And I hadn't really thought about the drones much. But then I went about my business and, had the dream in the back of my mind, didn't really think about it. And when I sat down to watch some TV later that night, I happened to turn on YouTube, and my news feed on YouTube was filled with drone stuff. And it wasn't until I started watching some of these videos that I realized that this unexplained phenomenon up in the sky could very well be corresponding with this thing that happened in my dream, where I got this message that the allies of humanity, whoever they are responsible for keeping the sky safe. Also, because I definitely remember the also. For anyone who isn't aware, Allies of Humanity is a particular phrase that belongs to Marshall V. N. Summers. Marshall V. N. Summers is a fellow who claims to have been visited by an angelic presence that told him that they belong to the Allies of Humanity, which is an unearthly kind of congregation of beings, angelic beings, that want humanity to survive and thrive and become part of the collective in the galaxy. And they provided a warning that extraterrestrials are not necessarily friendly, and that some of them want to dominate the Earth and are tricking us into kind of giving up our sovereignty a little bit. So the fact that I heard the phrase Allies of Humanity should be taken with a grain of salt, because I was working on an episode where I had been talking about Marshall V. N. Summers and his experiences, and that dream may have been a legacy of what had been going through my mind the day before. It's just worthwhile mentioning because of the fact that when I did have that dream, I also happened to start getting interest in the drone scenario that very next day, kind of by accident. As a result of that, I went out that evening at about 11 o'clock while my dog was doing her last hurrah before bedtime, and I went out and I had a look at the night sky, which I don't deliberately go and do very often. It was a beautiful, clear night, and I was able to see all the stars and the planets. We've got 2 key planets. I don't know. I'm ashamed to say I don't know. I'll have to figure out which ones they are, but we have 2 key planets that I can see every night when it's clear from my back garden. I think one of them might be Venus, but don't quote me on that because I'm not sure. I just remember hearing that somewhere. And I saw both of those planets. I saw a collection of stars, but I also saw something else. And I'm still not really sure what that was. I saw what looked like lights in the sky, that were not moving in an aeroplane formation, so they weren't traveling straight. So they weren't a plane or a helicopter traveling straight. They were kind of hovering in a region, and they were moving from left to right. And if they had been closer, then perhaps they could have been helicopters, but they were way too far away and way too high up. And there were two of them, and they weren't near each other. And that made me wonder, because if they were police helicopters, they weren't looking at the same event. But also it was kind of peculiar. They were a bit too high up to be police helicopters at that time of the night. And I don't live anywhere near an international airport or anything like that. So I really don't think that there would have been flights coming in from anywhere. I do have there is a small airport not far from where I am, but I don't think it operates at night. And so I do have questions about what I saw as well. However, it was a very minor sighting, if anything at all. It's just that I was switched on because of the dream and because of the story that was taking place. Quite a few viewers on the Ellie Dreams Another channel have asked me in the past to do a reading on the drones, and so I did. And what the cards seemed to indicate was that there was an issue of someone being unhappy with the status quo. And this is a reading I did very early in the drone scenario, as soon as I became aware of it. And so this entity was unhappy with the status quo, and there seemed to be something that was otherworldly taking place related to the incident. That it seemed like it was almost like a disagreement or an obstruction of some kind, or some kind of a low-level coup even. Something in which one group was in conflict with another group. But I wasn't able to see what they were in conflict about, but it kind of felt like a bit of a conflict. And that's really all that I was able to see in the cards. But it seemed as though the drones were a manifestation of something arising out of conflict. Okay. But there may have been, according to the cards, an alien factor or an extraterrestrial, non-human intelligent factor. So let's move into that concept. There are actually two sides to the story that I'm going to be talking about today. One side comes from that battle for disclosure that Ross Coulthart, the reporter at News Nation, talks about. Well, he's a host of a show on News Nation, and he talks about this battle for disclosure. The other side comes from someone else who talks about the battle for disclosure, and that's Stephen Greer. And these two sides they have different explanations of the same thing relating to the drones. But one of the explanations seems to coincide a little bit more closely to my recent reading and some of the things that I've talked about on this show, and also my gut feeling about the whole thing. And the other explanation never really felt intuitively right to me. It kind of felt like it was missing something. So, of course, I'm interested in looking at the topic in greater detail. So let's have a look at the Ross Coulthart side. And it's not actually about Ross Coulthart. It's actually about one of his guests. But this concept of there potentially being non-human intelligence related to this story of the drones. So Ross Coulthart is an alien, UAP, UFO, and extraterrestrial life kind of proponent. He reports as though he believes that they might all exist, and it seems that he does have an interest in this. He was one of the first conventional journalists to first admit that he has an interest in non-human intelligence, and that he believes that it might be that this might be part of what is responsible for the drone sightings. And I do consider Ross Coulthart to be a conventional journalist in the scheme of things. In his own words, having been interviewed by 3AW in Australia, 3AW Radio, Ross has said that if 60 Minutes had paid him what he wanted, he would still be there. Now, the fellow that really interests me, who Ross has been talking to recently, is a guy by the name of Luis Elizondo. Luis Elizondo is often referred to as a government whistleblower, but that has also been disputed by some people. Luis was born in Texas. His father, whose name was also Luis Elizondo, was a Cuban exile who volunteered for a CIA-sponsored group that attempted the Bay of Pigs invasion to overthrow Fidel Castro. Luis Elizondo claims to have been trained for similar types of missions, although I wasn't able to get confirmation of that during my research. I do know, however, that he attended the University of Miami, where he majored in microbiology and immunology. Luis Elizondo worked in military and government intelligence. He served in the U.S. Army with assignments in Korea, Kuwait, and within the U.S. He was also an intelligence officer operating in Afghanistan, South America, and at the Guantanamo Bay detention camp. Now, Luis Elizondo also worked at the Pentagon between 2008 and 2017. During that time, he claims that he was involved in a project called Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or AATIP. This was a project that was initiated by Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid to explore unexplained aerial phenomena. Right, that was the whole point of the AATIP program. Luis says that he resigned in 2017 because the Pentagon was excessively secretive about its work. And there were access issues around the topic of UAPs and what he called internal opposition within the program. So Luis Elizondo left the Pentagon because he couldn't get access to the information that he needed in order to be part of that project. And he believed that there was internal opposition against the program that he was working on that prevented disclosure, even to people who needed it to do their job. However, this portion of his career, which spans 9 years of his work, is heavily disputed by the Pentagon. They say that it's not true. And some of the statements that Luis Elizondo has made about his role in AATIP and his claims about UFOs have been met with skepticism and controversy as well. But then again, you know what? If you start talking about anything non-conventional, that isn't part of the traditional kind of messaging system, you're going to be treated as though people should be skeptic or consider you controversial. So, we mustn't hold that against him. But Pentagon officials have contested his statements outright. They say that he's not being truthful. And former colleagues who worked with Luis Elizondo have also said that he's grossly exaggerated his role within the Pentagon and that his accounts regarding UAPs aren't factual, and that he's been embroiled, and also he's been embroiled in some legal battles with the Pentagon about his history there as well. So I've worked, in government. I know that sometimes your employer can close ranks on you, and people will come out of the woodwork because they have to in order to secure their own jobs. And so they will say things about you and make you look as though you're a bit of a quack, when in fact you might be perfectly honest. So I don't want to hold anything against Luis Elizondo based on what his former employers or anything have said, because who knows what motivates them. But since leaving the Pentagon, Luis has become an author and a bit of a media personality in the context of UFOs and UAPs. He's also associated with an organization called, I think it's called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, which states a dedication for exploring and understanding UAPs. He's highly vocal, and he's a highly vocal advocate for the disclosure of information about UAPs. And he's also recently testified in front of the US House Committee on Oversight and Accountability regarding the UFOs, UAPs, and public disclosure. Okay. I've watched some, or perhaps even most, of Luis Elizondo's testimony to Congress, and I think he's testified twice now. At least I've seen 2 different instances. Once, I believe he was alone, or at least he appeared to be alone at the time, and once he was in a group of 4 people, if my memory serves me right. I actually picked up a few instances where I feel as though Luis appeared to backtrack under oath on some of the statements that he had made confidently when he wasn't under oath. And that for me was a bit of a red flag. So if he was doing a for-profit presentation or a seminar or recalling things that are in his book, then he'd make some very strong statements, very definitive statements. But under oath, he kind of backtracked. And instead of saying something is, he would say something might be, that kind of thing. And for me, that kind of presented a bit of a red flag. And because of that, I personally haven't really been very impressed with his congressional testimony or the testimony by any of the people who've been called to talk about UAPs and disclosure so far. Perhaps except David Grush. I found him interesting. The others just seem to be a bit too willing to testify, and I'd really like to see testimony from someone who is not willing to testify. I think that's where the meat is. So, but then again, I'm not on the inside and I have no insider knowledge about Pentagon business or anything like. So all I'm going by is I'm kind of going by my gut. And my gut says, no. Okay. So what Louise has been discussing with Ross Coulthart is, and this is just my view, of course, and I'm using my own words here to summarize what I understood from his various comments. What he's been saying is that the drones potentially include craft and phenomena from non-human intelligence. This is the drones that people are seeing in the sky, that they're actually potentially alien craft. They might be re-engineered alien craft or back-engineered alien craft, or they might be manned or unmanned alien craft. And they might be here doing surveillance, or they might be here to scope for sinister purposes. And the government knows this, but the government is powerless to do anything about it because obviously this non-human intelligence is far superior to us. And he hasn't really specified which branch of government knows this, but he claims that the government does, and that they're also lying to Americans about the drones, or at the very least, withholding information that the US citizenship are constitutionally entitled to. And he's made some very strong statements against the Biden administration for things like not doing anything about it, not doing their job, being incompetent, that kind of thing. So whilst also making strong statements about the incoming administration, the Trump administration, and saying that, they'll get to the bottom of it. Because he's in contact with some of the cabinet picks who are enthusiastic and seem to be on the ball. So there seems to be a bit of partisanship in the way that he's talking as well. So it kind of sounds, when you listen to Luis Elizondo talking about the drones, he sounds a little bit partisan, he sounds a little bit alarmist, and he certainly sounds quite anti-establishment. And there's also a bit of vagueness in what he's saying as well. And when I listen to all of that together, I kind of start to feel a bit doubtful about him. But that's just my viewpoint based on the things that I've seen. But that's also the alien perspective that Louise has thrown into the mix. And Ross Coulthart appears to be taking it at face value as being something that's credible and logical and reasonable dialogue for his show, because Luis Elizondo is a frequent guest with Ross on his show, particularly when it comes to talking about the drone phenomenon. Now, the other person that I want to mention in his perspective is Stephen Greer. And Stephen Greer has the exact opposite side of the alien discussion under his belt. He's looking at it from an entirely different perspective when it comes to the drone issue. The very first thing that I'm going to tell you about Stephen Greer is that Stephen calls Luis Elizondo a disinformation agent. He says that he's someone who is deliberately, well, these are not his words. I mean, the meaning of a disinformation agent is that they are someone who is deliberately throwing a mass of erroneous information into the discussion for the purposes of fulfilling a political agenda or to confuse the public by focusing them on false speculation so that they miss the actual real facts of the story. So when Stephen Greer calls Luis Elizondo a disinformation agent, that's what he's calling him, someone who is deliberately trying to confuse people so that they focus on the confusion rather than what is actually happening behind the scenes. The moment I heard Stephen Greer say this about Luis Elizondo, I suddenly got very interested in Stephen Greer because that's a very strong statement to make about another person who is seemingly on your side. And the reason why I say that is because both Luis Elizondo and Stephen Greer claim that they're pushing for public disclosure on the issue of UFOs, UAPs, and the US government's knowledge of non-human intelligence. So they're supposed to be on the same side, but they're not. So let's have a bit of a look at Stephen Greer. And then I'm going to share with you his views about what's going on with the drones. So Stephen was born on June 28, 1955 in Charlotte, North Carolina. That makes him a Cancerian, just like me. Okay, so he's passed that test. He claims to have seen UFOs at the age of 8 and 18, which sparked his interest in extraterrestrial phenomena. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from Appalachian State University in 1982 and a medical doctorate from James H. Quillen College of Medicine in East Tennessee State University in 1987. At university, Stephen worked as an emergency room physician and later chaired emergency medicine at Caldwell Memorial Hospital in North Carolina. He has a lifelong interest in UFOs as a hobby, but in 1998, he decided to retire from medicine to focus on his research into UFOs and ET, the existence of ETs, or the speculation of that, full time. And that's what he's done. So 2 years later, in 1990, Stephen founded the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is also known as CSETI. CSETI states that its aims are to promote the peaceful study and understanding of extraterrestrial intelligence. It continues to operate today, so it's been going for about 30 years. Or 35 years, and has main activity strands that include public information sharing and publishing written works and video content. CSETI has actually created an app called CE5. It has a project called the CE5 Initiative, and the focus of that is on human-initiated contact with ETs through consciousness and meditation. The centre conducts workshops and training sessions to teach techniques of contact to individuals and groups. And also it is very much involved in the Disclosure Project, which is about gathering and disseminating information from whistleblowers within the government and the military who claim to have knowledge of UFOs and ETs, and sharing that information with the public, so that ordinary people can gain an education about ETs and UFOs without a layer of government information or disinformation getting in the way of their knowledge. This part of the work that Stephen Greer and his organization does is directly relevant to Luis Elizondo, because Stephen Greer, as the founder of CSETI, should be thinking of Luis as a whistleblower, but he's not. And instead he's thinking of him as a disinformation agent. And I think that that shows that Stephen Greer's organization is acting with an element of discernment. They aren't just blanket believing everyone who walks through the door and starts calling themselves a witness. They kind of scratch the surface to get to the bottom of stuff. And so for me, I think that's a positive thing, even though, I'm still in my early days of research. Stephen Greer has also published a number of books and produced a variety of documentaries, all of which sort of tackled the subject of non-human intelligence and making a diplomatic style of contact with ETs and otherworldly beings, and also pushing the need for public disclosure of what the government knows about UFOs, UAPs, and non-human intelligence. Instead of looking at aliens or UFOs as a kind of a science fiction-y type of topic, Stephen has focused his work at the center on kind of the spiritual side of ufology, things like meditation, raising consciousness, and improving public awareness of what's possible and what's probable for the future. And of course, just like Luis Elizondo has his detractors, Stephen Greer also has his. And there are many people out there who will question his credibility, will be skeptical about his work, call him a kook, and all kinds of things. And they will poo-poo any claims that he puts forward as well. So this is a standard thing. I mean, I read tarot and people say that about me because of reading the tarot. So I totally understand that not everyone is going to buy into something that isn't exactly on their wavelength. But since the 1990s, he has been continuing with his work regardless. And to many people with an interest in ufology or non-human intelligence and the question of our place in reality and in the cosmos, Stephen Greer is a hero to many of those people in his field. But there's something else that Stephen is a really strong advocate for, and that is for the release of free energy sources, which he says are being withheld from the public for the purposes of profit making by powerful people. And this is something that caught my interest because it coincides with earlier findings by Nikola Tesla. And for anyone who doesn't know, Nikola Tesla was a world-renowned scientist who also claimed almost 100 years ago, actually, that humanity has always had easy access to free energy, and that there was sufficient free energy available to indefinitely power the world forever without harming the planet or affecting people, animals, or plant life in any way. And that's just a little sneak peek about something to do with Nikola Tesla before we move on with the show. But one other thing to know about Nikola Tesla is he was a brilliant scientist, and a lot of what we are relying on now related to electricity was actually invented by him or discovered by him. But somehow Nikola died penniless and alone in a cheap hotel room that he'd been living in for around 10 years because he was sort of sabotaged throughout his life by the establishment and ended up dying surrounded by all of his documented inventions and discoveries, but pretty much penniless, with nothing but his, withering mind to keep him company as he got older. And somewhere between discovering his deceased body and giving him quite a modest burial, someone came in and stole all of his work, all of his scientific notes. His life's work just vanished. And the speculation is that all of that documentation and all the archives of his work were stolen by powerful people who didn't want the world to know the truth. Because Nikola was surrounded when he died by his discoveries of the truth. Despite the fact that he was broke and alone when he died, he also represented a massive risk to the status quo, the scientific status quo, but also the power centers that control our everyday existence. So anyway, let's move on. As recently as just a few days ago, actually 6 days ago, I think, if I'm going to be exact, Stephen Greer stated in an interview with a fellow called Billy Carson on the YouTube channel called Forbidden Knowledge Network the following. He said that unless they get assassinated, there are insiders in the United States government who are planning to reveal the truth behind the drone craziness and this free energy topic within the next 3 weeks or so. So somewhere between now and Inauguration Day. And yes, he said it has to do with aliens. I'm going to leave a link to his interview in the description for today's show. Stephen Greer, so that you can actually hear that for yourself, Stephen Greer also claimed that the drones are a psychological operation against the public, so PSYOPs. And the purpose of the PSYOP is to hide the truth about something that actually has occurred or is beginning to occur now. Stephen says that it's not the White House that's doing this psychological operation against the public. It's not Congress. And in fact, the White House and Congress are just as frustrated as everybody else is. And the funny thing is, when I've been watching the interviews with Congress people and with representatives from the White House, I've been getting a sense that they're as frustrated as everyone else. They want to appear to be in control. Well, some of them do. Some of them just want to bang their fists on the table and yell and scream. But mostly they want to appear to be in control. But you can see that they really don't seem to know anything, and that is frustrating them as well. But they're not going to admit that because they don't want people to panic about what's going on. And that's why it feels a little bit like a mutiny to me. Even when I have asked the cards about this on that recent episode of Ellie Dreams and Under, they seem to indicate that there is some kind of a mutiny taking place inside the government. So I'm going to include 2 links from my recent Ellie Dreams and Under episodes as well. One of them is a reading with regards to the drone phenomena. The other is my reading on what appears to be like a coup that may be taking place inside the government. And those links will appear in the description for this show today. You can decide what you think about everything once you see all of those videos. Just a little extra something to do, a bit of homework to do over the holiday season, just in case you're sitting around with a full belly and nothing better to do, and in case you get sick of watching all of that Christmas television stuff. So, in a nutshell, Stephen Greer says that there is a real genuine concern inside the Pentagon and elsewhere with well-intended people that the issue of disclosure is getting too messy. They're planning to provide real evidence of real non-human intelligent phenomena and also evidence of this free energy access as well. And they're going to be doing it by around about mid-January. So prior to the inauguration is what they're aiming for, before the change in presidents. And that it has nothing to do with politics. The timing has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with humanity. But the information to be disclosed is so earth-shattering, according to Stephen Greer, that it really is a risk to the status quo. And that small group of whistleblowers who intend on revealing this big deal of information are in serious mortal danger as a result of that. They really are at risk of being assassinated. But if they survive, then the reveal is going to take place. And once it does, there will be no doubts whatsoever of what's real and what's not, which is kind of weird. But anyway, and Stephen says that the drone situation is a massive disinformation campaign to try to camouflage what's real. And that the disinformation campaign is coming from the status quo, the real power structure. Not the White House, not Congress, not the Republicans or the Democrats, not Joe Biden or Donald Trump, not even Elon Musk are in control. The real power are the ones that we don't know names for. They don't want disclosure. They want things to be as they are, and so they're throwing around a lot of disinformation. And Stephen Greer seems to indicate that Luis Elizondo is one of the agents who is being incentivized by this status quo to throw around disinformation as well. And that the mainstream media, which includes first-tier and second-tier news organizations, so everyone from MSNBC to Fox to CNN, CBS, ABC, News Nation, the whole lot, they're all saying what they're being paid to say or what they're being ordered to say, what they're being scripted to say, which is the reason why the conversations about the drones just keeps going around and around and around. It creates a lot of fake outrage and deliberate confusion and projection and finger pointing and attacks and counterattacks, and it's all just a great big disinformation campaign. So that when something real happens, like, for example, these whistleblowers that are expected to reveal in the next month or so, when something real happens, it gets buried under a fog of nonsense. And as weird as all of that sounds, Stephen Greer's explanation made much more sense to me than anything that Luis Elizondo has said so far. Not because I'm a supporter of Stephen Greer. I really don't know anything about him, very, very little. He's just a name that I know. I recognize his face. I sometimes see that he has documentaries on YouTube and things like that. And I know that he's been talking about UFOs for a long time, but I've never really taken an interest in looking deeper. I will from now on, but but I want to make sure that I'm very clear that I'm not a supporter or a proponent of his. It's just that what he says seems to coincide with what my gut says. It just feels more right than when I see Luis Elizondo speak. But that's just me. And of course, he's a Cancerian. So, I'm a Cancerian. I totally get it. What I know about Cancerians is that they tend to be very true to the thing that obsesses them. And when they work in a field that they believe in, that they feel very strongly about, it grabs hold of them and it propels them forward, and they put their heart and soul into it. And because I know that about myself as a Cancerian and about Cancerians in general, they really throw their passion into something that they do. And that kind of makes me feel that if Stephen Greer is a Cancerian too, I don't know, he might have an element of that inside him as well, which kind of gives him that sense of credibility to me as well. So I'm going to add a fourth link to our homework for the holiday season. And so far we've got the link to the Stephen Greer interview. We've got my 2 tarot readings. One of them is about the drones. The other one is about whether or not there's a coup taking place. And I'm also going to add the link to the Ross Coulthart episode in which he's speaking at length to Luis Elizondo about how the government is dropping the ball when it comes to these drones and that we should all demand answers and everything. I would love to know what you think about this and what side of the alien story rings true for you. Is it the Luis Elizondo side or is it the Stephen Greer side? And I'm also on the Ellie channel, on the Ellie Dreams Another channel, doing a reading, throwing a third person into the mix. And that is Chris Bledsoe, because Chris Bledsoe has another theory as well. And so I'm going to test all 3 of them with the cards. Chris Bledsoe seems to think the drones are man-made and they are a distraction. But behind the drones, there are orbs, and the orbs are a non-earthly existence, non-earthly entity that is real. And so the drones are up there trying to camouflage the orbs, but that the orbs are going to outlive the drones. And so long after the drones are gone, the orbs will still be there. And as time goes on, we will all be able to see them. That's what Chris Bledsoe has to say. So let's see here. What we do seem to have is we seem to have some kind of a conflict taking place here, and it will unfold. Perhaps by the time you hear my voice, perhaps as we move into January, as January begins to unfold. Today, yesterday, this week, last month, and in the past 10 years at least, there's been a lot of chaotic news reporting, and it is really easy to get caught up in the chaos and the uncertainty that surrounds us every day. And this drone thing is just an example of that. It's almost like there's someone out there that wants to keep us frightened and confused and exhausted. And next week, I'm going to be back here, and I've decided I'm going to devote next week's episode directly to this topic of getting us out of our reactive, fear-based world of strange things in the sky coming to get us, or whatever the next fear-mongering kind of topic is. Because honestly, if whatever it is that was coming to get us was so dangerous, I think we'd be thoroughly got by now, because we'd just be sitting ducks, The fact that we're still here is a testimony to the fact that everything is probably going to be okay. I tend to believe, my own personal viewpoint is that it's a psyop. It's a psychological operation that's designed to create confusion over and above something that's real. So something is real out there and something else, man-made, is being thrown up there to add confusion. And I think that the thing that's real that is more difficult to see is probably non-earthly. But until we know, in the meantime, let's focus on something useful, something positive to help us to make 2025 the best year that it can be. And so here's a clue about what's going to happen on next week's show. There's a great Stoic by the name of Marcus Aurelius who once said, and I quote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." My name is Ellie, and you can find me at the Ellie Dreams Down Under channel on YouTube. Don't forget to check out my new book. It's called Tarot Well Done. It's now available on Amazon in paperback, large print, paperback, and ebook. And somewhere in January, it's also going to be available for wider distribution. So you should be seeing it in more places. I'm working on that right now. Thank you to everyone who's listening on one of KGRA's broadcasting platforms. If you'd like to become a member of the KGRA viewership family, just go to live.kgradb.com and enter promo code Ellie to get 30% off your subscription. A messy one today, but you know what? It had to be done. That's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.